Imagine standing at the edge of a cliff at midnight, staring into a sky full of stars, and suddenly realizing that somewhere out there, something is staring back. Not with curiosity, with memory, because it has been here before, because this is its home, and because it left. What if the greatest mystery in human history isn't whether we are alone in the universe, but whether we were ever truly alone on this planet? What if everything we know about the origins of humanity is only half the story? What if the first civilization on Earth didn't perish in a catastrophe, wasn't destroyed by war or disease, but simply chose to leave, voluntarily abandon this planet, leaving behind only stone puzzles and the whisper of ancient myths? Sounds like science fiction, doesn't it? But before you dismiss this idea, let me ask you one simple question. Why do virtually all ancient cultures of the world, separated by thousands of kilometers and vast oceans, tell the same story? A story about gods who came from the sky, taught humanity everything, and then returned to the stars, promising one day to come again. We were taught that human civilization began approximately 6,000 years ago in the valleys of Mesopotamia, that before that there were only primitive hunters and gatherers, incapable of creating anything more complex than a stone axe. But a series of recent discoveries in the most unexpected corners of the planet is beginning to paint an entirely different picture, a picture in which the history of humanity stretches far deeper into the past than we ever dared to imagine, a picture in which someone was here before us. Today we will explore three mysteries that official science prefers to ignore. We will look at structures that could not have been built without technologies that only appeared in the 20th century. We will examine geological data pointing to the existence of an advanced civilization long before the last ice age. And we will listen to the voices of the ancients who left us messages encoded in myths and legends. But the central question that will haunt us throughout this entire journey is this: if the first civilization truly existed, and if it possessed knowledge surpassing our own, why did it leave? What did they know that we do not? And most unsettling of all, will they ever return? Hello, and welcome to our channel, where we explore the darkest corners of history and the deepest secrets of our planet. Here, we are not afraid to ask uncomfortable questions and look at familiar things from unfamiliar angles. Settle in, let your mind open, because what we are about to discuss requires a certain flexibility of thought. This is not just another conspiracy theory. It is an attempt to piece together the scattered fragments of a puzzle that humanity has been trying to solve since the very moment of its appearance. Who are we? Where did we come from? And why does a strange feeling never leave us? That once something greater was here. If you enjoy exploring the boundaries of the known and the unknown, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next journey into the depths of time. Now let's begin with what is accepted as truth. According to modern archaeology and anthropology, the history of human civilization begins around the 4th millennium BCE. That is when, in the fertile valleys between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, the first true civilization arose, the Sumerians. They invented writing, built the first cities, and developed systems of irrigation and astronomical observation. Before them, we are assured, there were only scattered tribes, slowly transitioning from hunting and gathering to settled agriculture. This model of linear progress is very convenient. It paints a picture of gradual, continuous development, from simple to complex, from stone tools to bronze, from bronze to iron, from caves to huts, from huts to palaces. Each generation slightly smarter than the previous one, each era slightly more advanced than the one before it. But what if this model is not merely incomplete, but fundamentally wrong? In 1963, in southeastern Turkey, a local farmer working his field stumbled upon a strange stone. He tried to dig it up, but the stone turned out to be part of something far larger. More than 30 years passed before archaeologists seriously investigated the site. What they discovered overturned our entire understanding of ancient history. Göbekli Tepe. This name is now familiar to many, but the true significance of this discovery has still not been grasped by most people. This is not simply an ancient temple or ritual center. This is a time bomb planted under the foundation of all official history. The Göbekli Tepe complex was built approximately 12,000 years ago. 12,000, that is more than 6,000 years before the emergence of Sumerian civilization. It is 7,000 years before the construction of the Egyptian pyramids. It is so ancient that at the time of its creation, mammoths still roamed the earth. And here is what truly staggers the imagination. Göbekli Tepe is not a primitive structure. It is not a random pile of stones assembled by Neolithic hunters. It is a meticulously planned architectural complex with massive T-shaped pillars, some of which reach 6 meters in height and weigh up to 20 tons. These pillars are decorated with intricate carvings depicting animals, some executed with such mastery that they could rival works of art from far later eras. But most crucially, according to the official model of history, at this time there were no cities, no organized society, no tools necessary for such construction. There was no wheel, no metal implements, no domesticated animals that could have helped transport these gigantic blocks. And yet, someone built this. Archaeologists found themselves in a difficult position. They could not deny the age of the structure, since radiocarbon analysis gave unambiguous results. But they also could not explain how it was possible. In the end, the safest path was chosen. Simply acknowledge Göbekli Tepe's existence and try to fit it into the existing model, declaring that hunter-gatherers were capable of far more than we had thought. But this explanation raises more questions than it answers. If primitive hunters could build such structures, why didn't they do so everywhere? Why don't we find similar complexes across the world from the same era? And why, after construction was completed roughly 10,000 years ago, was the entire complex deliberately buried under earth and abandoned, as though its builders wanted to protect it or hide it, or both at once? This is where we arrive at the central thesis of today's investigation. What if Göbekli Tepe is not the beginning of civilization, but its end? What if this is the last monument of a civilization that was already departing? A civilization that, for some reason, decided to leave this planet, leaving behind only stones as a farewell message. I understand how radical this sounds, but before rejecting this idea, let's examine several more pieces of the puzzle, because Göbekli Tepe is far from the only anomaly in our history. Let's travel several thousand kilometers to the southwest, to Egypt, to the Giza Plateau, where the most famous structures of the ancient world stand, the Great Pyramids. We are told they were built approximately 4,500 years ago as tombs for pharaohs. This version has become so ingrained in the popular consciousness that few ever question it. But when you begin to examine the details carefully, more and more questions arise. The Great Pyramid of Khufu consists of approximately 2,300,000 stone blocks. The average weight of each block is about 2.5 tons, though some reach 50 and even 80 tons. According to the official version, the pyramid was built in approximately 20 years. If you run the simple math, this means the builders needed to quarry, transport, shape, and set into place roughly one block every 2 minutes, day and night, without pause, for 20 consecutive years. And this without cranes, without trucks, without even iron tools. Official Egyptology insists everything was done with copper chisels, stone hammers, wooden sledges, and raw physical force, that tens of thousands of workers simply hauled these gigantic blocks on their shoulders. But let's look at this from an engineering perspective. Modern experiments have shown that even using contemporary technology, replicating the precision of the pyramids presents serious challenges. The Great Pyramid is aligned with the cardinal directions to within less than 1/10 of a degree. Its base is virtually perfectly flat, with a deviation of only a few centimeters over more than 230 meters. The ratio of its perimeter to its height equals twice the number pi, accurate to the 3rd decimal place. Coincidence? Perhaps. But the list of such coincidences keeps growing suspiciously long. The Great Pyramid sits precisely at the intersection of the longest overland parallel and the longest overland meridian. In other words, at the exact geographical center of all the land on Earth. To calculate this position, one would need to know the shape and dimensions of the planet, the location of all continents, and possess the ability to make precise astronomical and geographical measurements. We are told the ancient Egyptians believed the Earth was a flat disk, and simultaneously we are told they accidentally built their pyramid at the exact geographical center of the planet. Something clearly doesn't add up. But the pyramids are only the most famous example. Scattered across the world are hundreds, if not thousands, of structures that defy our understanding of ancient technology. In Peru, high in the Andes, stands the fortress of Sacsayhuamán. Its walls are composed of gigantic stone blocks, some weighing over 100 tons. These blocks are shaped and fitted together with such precision that it is impossible to slip a knife blade between them, and this without any binding mortar. Many blocks have a complex polygonal form with dozens of faces, and each face fits perfectly against the faces of neighboring blocks. The Inca, to whom the construction of Sacsayhuamán is attributed, had no wheel and used no iron tools. They left no written records of their building methods. When Spanish conquistadors asked the Inca who had built these structures, they answered that it was the gods, or those who were here before them. In Lebanon, in the Bekaa Valley, lies Baalbek. This site is known for its Roman temples, but beneath them hides something far more ancient and enigmatic. The foundation of the Temple of Jupiter is composed of 3 enormous stone blocks known as the Trilithon. Each of these blocks weighs approximately 800 tons. For comparison, the most powerful modern mobile cranes can lift loads of about 500 tons, and in a nearby quarry lies yet another block, the so-called Stone of the Pregnant Woman, which weighs over 1,000 tons. It was clearly prepared for transport, but for some reason remained in place, as though the builders suddenly abandoned their work and left. The Romans who built the temple upon this foundation could not have created the foundation itself. They simply used what was already there. When Roman historians wrote about Baalbek, they noted that this place had been sacred since time immemorial, that structures built by giants or gods once stood here. Now let's bring these facts together. Across the world, from Turkey to Egypt, from Peru to Lebanon, from Easter Island to Japan, we find structures that seem impossible. They are made from stones we can barely move even with modern technology. They are built with precision we can barely achieve using laser measuring instruments. They are oriented toward the stars and cardinal directions with flawless accuracy. And all of these cultures, separated by oceans and millennia, tell remarkably similar stories. Stories about gods or superhuman beings who came from somewhere beyond, taught humanity the foundations of civilization, and then departed, promising to return. The Sumerians spoke of the Anunnaki, gods who descended from the sky. The Egyptians told of the Neteru, the first divine rulers who governed Egypt long before the pharaohs. The Inca revered Viracocha, a white-bearded god who came from the sea and left over the sea. Hindu texts describe Vimanas, flying chariots of the gods, and wars fought with weapons strikingly similar to modern nuclear arms. Coincidence, collective fantasy, or collective memory? What if all of these myths describe the same event, the departure of the first civilization, of those who were here before us, who built the impossible and left us only stones and legends? But here the central question arises. If such a civilization existed, if it possessed technologies surpassing our own, why did it leave? What could drive an entire civilization to abandon its planet? To answer this, we must go deeper into geology, climatology, into the history of the Earth itself. Because approximately 12,000 years ago, our planet endured a catastrophe of such magnitude that its traces are still visible on every continent. But we will speak of that in the next part of our journey. For now, allow these questions to settle in your mind. Allow yourself for a moment to imagine that everything we were taught in school is only a small fragment of a far larger and far stranger story. We are accustomed to thinking of ourselves as the pinnacle of development, that before us there was no one smarter, no one more technologically advanced. But what if that is merely our pride? What if we are not the first, but the second, or the third, or the 100th? Earth is 4.5 billion years old. Homo sapiens has existed for approximately 300,000 years. Written history covers only the last 5,000 to 6,000 years. It is as though the history of Earth were a book of 1,000 pages, and all of human civilization occupied the last line on the last page. What was written on all the other pages? Perhaps nothing. Perhaps for billions of years our planet was merely a lifeless rock, then a home for bacteria, then a stage for dinosaurs, and perhaps in this book there are chapters we have not yet read, chapters about those who were here before us, and about the reasons they left. So we return to the question that gives researchers no peace around the world. If the first civilization truly existed and possessed technologies we are only beginning to understand, why did it disappear? Or more precisely, why did it choose to leave? To get closer to an answer, we must turn to the science that does not lie, to geology, to the study of the Earth itself, its layers, its scars, its memory, written in stone and ice. Around 12,800 years ago, our planet entered a period geologists call the Younger Dryas, a sudden and catastrophic return to glacial conditions. After thousands of years of gradual warming, temperatures on the planet dropped sharply. Glaciers that had begun to retreat moved southward again. Sea levels changed. climate zones shifted. Entire species of animals went extinct within just a few generations. For a long time, scientists could not explain what triggered this sudden climatic upheaval. Gradual changes in Earth's orbit or solar activity could not have produced such a sharp effect. Something happened, something fast and catastrophic. In 2007, a group of scientists put forward a hypothesis that has since been gaining increasing confirmation. They proposed that around 12,800 years ago, Earth collided with fragments of a comet or large meteorite, not one body, but an entire swarm of debris that rained down upon the planet, primarily in the northern hemisphere. Evidence of this event was found on 3 continents. In geological layers from this period, anomalously high concentrations of nanodiamonds have been found, microscopic spheres that form only at extremely high temperatures, along with other materials characteristic of cosmic impacts. These layers have been found in North America, Europe, and West Asia. Everywhere, the same signature. Everywhere, the same time period. But the most astonishing discovery was made relatively recently. In 2018, a gigantic impact crater was discovered beneath the Greenland ice sheet, the Hiawatha Crater. Its diameter is 31 kilometers. This means the object that created it was roughly the size of a small city, about 1.5 kilometers across. Imagine this for a moment, an object the size of a city, traveling at dozens of kilometers per second, slamming into the Greenland ice sheet. The energy of such an impact is equivalent to the explosion of millions of nuclear bombs simultaneously. Cubic kilometers of ice instantly vaporize. Trillions of tons of water vapor and dust are hurled into the atmosphere. The shock wave circles the planet multiple times. And this was not the only impact. There is reason to believe Earth suffered a multiple bombardment during this period, fragments of the same cosmic body raining down over the course of days or even weeks, each one triggering local catastrophes, fires, tsunamis, earthquakes. Together, they changed everything. Now recall Göbekli Tepe. This enigmatic complex was deliberately buried under Earth at approximately the same time this catastrophe occurred. Coincidence? Or did its builders know something was coming? Perhaps they were trying to protect their creation from what was about to happen, to preserve it for future generations. And here is one more detail worth pondering. On one of the pillars at Göbekli Tepe, there is a carved image that some researchers interpret as a star map. And on this map, a prominent position is held by the constellation we today call Cygnus, the direction from which, according to some calculations, the comet swarm may have arrived. Did the builders of Göbekli Tepe record information about the catastrophe? Were they witnesses to the event? Or did they know about it in advance? But let's go even deeper, because geology tells us stories that stretch far further back than 12,000 years. One of the most intriguing mysteries of the ancient world is connected to the Sphinx. This giant monument with the body of a lion and a human head was, according to the official version, created approximately 4,500 years ago during the reign of Pharaoh Khafre. But there are serious grounds to believe the Sphinx is far older. In 1991, geologist Robert Schoch of Boston University conducted a detailed study of the erosion on the Sphinx's body. His conclusions caused a storm in the scientific community. Schoch found that the pattern of erosion on the Sphinx and the walls of the surrounding enclosure corresponds to the action of water, not wind and sand, as one would expect in a desert, but specifically flowing water, rainfall. But Egypt has not received significant rainfall for the last 5,000 years. The Sahara turned into a desert roughly 7,000 years ago. Before that, it was a savanna covered in grass with rivers and lakes. If the erosion on the Sphinx was caused by rainwater, this means it was created during an era when rain still fell in Egypt, that is, at least 7,000 years ago, and possibly much earlier. Some researchers, based on the depth of the erosion channels, suggest the Sphinx may be 12,000 years old, or even older. This corresponds to the era of Göbekli Tepe. This corresponds to the time of the Great Catastrophe. This corresponds to the period when, according to our hypothesis, the first civilization still existed on Earth. Official Egyptology rejects these conclusions. They insist the Sphinx was built under Khafre, despite the fact that there is not a single ancient Egyptian inscription that confirms this. Despite the fact that the Sphinx's head is disproportionately small relative to its body, as though it was later recarved from an originally larger head. Despite the geological data pointing to a far greater age. Why such resistance to the evidence? Because acknowledging the ancient age of the Sphinx would mean acknowledging the existence of an advanced civilization long before this is considered possible. It would require rewriting textbooks, revisiting dissertations, admitting that entire generations of scientists were wrong. But science must follow facts, even when facts lead in uncomfortable directions. And the facts tell us that on this planet, someone was building monumental structures long before the official beginning of history. Now let's turn to another source of geological information: ice cores. These are cylindrical samples of ice that scientists extract by drilling deep into the glaciers of Antarctica and Greenland. Each layer of ice corresponds to a particular year in the past. By analyzing air bubbles trapped in these layers, we can learn the composition of the atmosphere thousands, even hundreds of thousands, of years ago. Ice cores from Antarctica cover a period of up to 800,000 years, and they tell a remarkable story, a story of cycles, of repeating ice ages alternating with warm interglacial periods. Each cycle lasts approximately 100,000 years. Each time the Earth plunges into cold, then warms, then cools again. We currently live in an interglacial period that began approximately 11,700 years ago, right after the end of the Younger Dryas, right after the Great Catastrophe. But here is what is interesting. The previous interglacial, the Eemian period, was approximately 120,000 years ago. It lasted around 15,000 years. Temperatures were even higher than today. Sea levels were several meters above their current position. Conditions for the development of civilization were ideal, and 120,000 years ago, Homo sapiens already existed. Our species appeared approximately 300,000 years ago. This means humanity had sufficient time to develop, not once, but possibly several times. Think about this. Our modern industrial civilization developed in less than 300 years. From the first steam engines to spaceflight took about 200 years. If a similar development had occurred 120,000 years ago, what would remain of it today? Almost nothing. Metal structures rust and vanish within a few thousand years. Concrete crumbles, plastic degrades, electronics turns to dust. The only thing that could survive on such a timescale is stone. Massive stone structures, like the pyramids, like the Sphinx, like Göbekli Tepe. There is one more fact that rarely receives attention in popular discussions. Much of the coastal territory that existed 12,000 years ago is today underwater. After the end of the last ice age, global sea levels rose approximately 120 meters. This means that vast stretches of land accessible to our ancestors are now buried beneath the ocean. People have always settled near water, by rivers, seas, coastlines. If an ancient civilization existed, its main centers would most likely have been located precisely where the seafloor now lies. And indeed, underwater research over recent decades has uncovered many enigmatic structures. Off the coast of Japan, near Yonaguni Island, at a depth of 25 meters, a massive stone complex was found with clear geometric forms: steps, terraces, passages. Official science insists these are natural geological formations, but many geologists and archaeologists disagree. In the Indian Ocean's Gulf of Khambhat, at a depth of over 30 meters, ruins of what may be an ancient city were discovered, covering an area of approximately 9 square kilometers. Radiocarbon analysis of recovered artifacts yielded an age of around 9,500 years, older than any known city in India, older than Sumer. In the Mediterranean Sea, off the Egyptian coast, the submerged cities of Heraklion and Canopus were found, described in ancient texts and now confirmed on the ocean floor. We have explored less than 5% of the world's oceans. The majority of the underwater world remains as unknown to us as the far side of the moon. But let us return to our central question. If the first civilization existed, if it possessed technology sufficient to build pyramids and shape stones weighing hundreds of tons, why did it leave? Geology gives us part of the answer: catastrophe, a great cataclysm that struck the Earth 12,800 years ago. Cosmic impacts, sudden climate change, the flooding of coastal territories. This could explain the disappearance of a civilization. But it does not explain a voluntary departure. It does not explain why they chose to leave the planet unless they knew about the catastrophe in advance. And here we arrive at the most troubling part of our hypothesis. What if the first civilization possessed astronomical knowledge sufficient to predict the approach of a comet? What if they knew a collision was inevitable long before it happened? What if they were preparing? The pyramids, the Sphinx, Göbekli Tepe. What if these are not simply temples or tombs? What if they are messages, time capsules created to transmit knowledge through catastrophe, built from stone because only stone could survive what was about to happen? And what if part of this civilization chose not to stay and wait? What if they left, departed from Earth, set off for wherever they had perhaps once come from? This would explain why Göbekli Tepe was deliberately buried. It was a farewell, a preservation of knowledge for those who would come after, for us. It would explain why the myths of all peoples speak of gods who departed and promised to return. Because they truly did leave, and perhaps they truly do plan to come back. Now we must turn to the third type of evidence, to human memory, to myths and legends, to the messages our ancestors passed from generation to generation across thousands of years. Because if geology does not lie, then perhaps the collective memory of humanity also holds more truth than we are accustomed to believe. Myths are not simply tales for children. They are encrypted messages from the depths of ages, from those who saw, who remembered, who wanted us to know. For centuries, educated people have dismissed them as primitive attempts to explain natural phenomena, inventions of priests to control the masses. That is what we were taught to think. But what if we were wrong? Let us begin with the cradle of civilization, with Sumer. This ancient culture, which flourished in Mesopotamia approximately 5,000 years ago, left us thousands of clay tablets with cuneiform inscriptions. And among these texts are stories that still give researchers no peace. The Sumerians wrote of the Anunnaki, a word that literally translates as those who from heaven to earth came. According to Sumerian texts, the Anunnaki were powerful beings who arrived on earth in deep antiquity. They created humanity by mixing their essence with that of primitive beings already inhabiting the planet. They taught people agriculture, astronomy, mathematics, and medicine. They built the first cities. They ruled as kings and gods, and then they left. Many scholars dismiss these stories as mythology, but there are details that give pause. The Sumerians possessed astonishing astronomical knowledge. They knew of planets impossible to see with the naked eye. They described the solar system with accuracy that Western science only achieved in the 20th century. Where did this knowledge come from in a Bronze Age civilization? The Sumerian texts state that the Anunnaki transmitted this knowledge to them, that the gods taught them to read the stars and measure time, and that all of Sumerian wisdom was the inheritance of those who came before. The ancient Egyptians believed in an age they called Zep Tepi, the first time, the age of the gods. According to their traditions, long before the first pharaohs, Egypt was ruled by the Neteru, divine beings who descended from the sky. They built great structures, taught people the arts and sciences, and established laws and order. The Egyptian historian Manetho, who had access to ancient temple archives, compiled a chronology of Egypt's rulers. According to his list, before the first human pharaohs, the country was ruled by gods, then demigods, then spirits of the dead, with the total duration of this divine rule exceeding 30,000 years. Modern Egyptologists dismiss these figures as mythological exaggeration. But what if Manetho knew something we do not? The great Sphinx faces east. Every day it greets the rising sun. But there is one detail that astronomers have noticed. If one calculates the position of the stars 12,500 years ago, on the day of the spring equinox, the Sphinx gazed directly at the constellation of Leo rising on the horizon. The lion looks at the lion. Coincidence or an intentional orientation pointing to the time of its creation? The Egyptians believed their gods would one day return, that the age of the gods had not ended forever, but merely paused, and that in the end of times, Osiris and the other Neteru would appear on earth once more. This belief permeated the entire Egyptian culture. The pyramids, the temples, the mummies, all were preparation for the return of the gods. Now let us turn to India. Ancient Indian texts, the Rig Veda, the Mahabharata, the Ramayana, contain descriptions that sound strikingly modern. The Vimanas, flying chariots of the gods, described in minute detail their shape, materials, method of movement. Some researchers note that these descriptions bear a remarkable resemblance to modern aircraft. But even more astonishing are the descriptions of wars the gods waged. The Mahabharata tells of battles fought with weapons of unimaginable power. One such weapon, the Brahmastra, is described as releasing a blinding light bright as 1,000 suns. After its use, people lost their hair and nails. Water became poisoned. Birds fell from the sky. This was written thousands of years ago, but it bears a startling resemblance to the effects of nuclear weapons. Radiation sickness, radioactive contamination, instantaneous incineration. Skeptics will say these are merely poetic exaggerations, but in Rajasthan, India, there is a place called Lonar, a crater long considered volcanic, but whose radioactivity levels are anomalously high and whose pattern of destruction more closely resembles an explosion than volcanic activity. And in the ancient city of Mohenjo-Daro in Pakistan, archaeologists found skeletons of people lying in the streets as though they had died suddenly without warning. Some of these skeletons remain highly radioactive even today, thousands of years later. Official science cannot explain this phenomenon, but the ancient texts can. What if the wars of the gods were real events? What if they describe a conflict that took place in deep antiquity? A conflict that may have been one of the reasons the first civilization chose to leave. Let us cross the Pacific to Mesoamerica. The Maya, the Aztecs, the Toltecs, all these great cultures told stories of the feathered serpent, Quetzalcoatl among the Aztecs, Kukulkan among the Maya. This god is described as a tall, fair-skinned, bearded man who came from across the ocean. He taught people agriculture, the calendar, astronomy, and the arts. He forbade human sacrifice. He brought civilization, and then he left, sailing east toward the rising sun. But he promised to return, and this promise proved so powerful that when the Spanish conquistadors arrived in Mexico, the Aztecs initially believed the returned gods had come. On the other side of the Pacific, in Polynesia, stories are told of gods who sailed from distant lands and taught the islanders navigation, construction, and agriculture. The Polynesians were the greatest navigators of the ancient world, crossing thousands of kilometers of open ocean by the stars and currents. Where did this knowledge come from for peoples who had no writing? They say the gods taught them. In Greece, the story was told of Prometheus, the titan who stole fire from the gods and gave it to humanity. For this he was punished and chained to a rock. Fire here is not merely flame. It is a symbol of knowledge, technology, civilization. Prometheus gave people the tools of development and was punished by the other gods for it. Why? Perhaps because not all the inhabitants of the heavens wished to share their knowledge with humanity. Perhaps there were disagreements among them about how to treat the young race on this small blue planet. This theme of conflict among the gods repeats in myths across the world. Sumerian texts describe wars between different groups of Anunnaki. Indian epics tell of battles between the Devas and Asuras, gods and demons. Norse sagas speak of the war between the Aesir and the Vanir. Greek mythology describes the Titanomachy, the war of gods and titans. What if all these stories describe the same conflict? A split within the first civilization, disagreements about the fate of the earth and of humanity. And what if the result of this conflict was an exodus, the departure of those who lost, or those who simply chose not to participate any longer? There is one more element that unites the myths of all peoples, the story of the Great Flood. The Sumerian Ziusudra, the biblical Noah, the Indian Manu, the Greek Deucalion, the Mesoamerican legends of a flooded world. More than 500 cultures worldwide have stories of a catastrophic flood that destroyed the previous world. Modern science confirms that at the end of the last ice age, massive inundations occurred. As glaciers melted, gigantic lakes of meltwater formed, held back by ice dams. When these dams broke, volumes of water were released capable of flooding entire continents in a matter of hours. One such event occurred approximately 12,900 years ago, when Lake Agassiz in North America, one of the largest freshwater lakes in Earth's history, its surface area exceeding that of modern France, broke through its ice dam. The water rushed to the ocean at a speed and volume without parallel. Global sea levels rose by several meters in just a few years. Imagine the coastal civilizations of that time, cities on the shores of seas and rivers, ports, agricultural lands. All of it disappeared underwater, not over centuries, but over years, perhaps over months. Those who survived preserved the memory of this event, passing it from generation to generation. Over time, the details were distorted, names changed, but the essence remained. There was a world before the flood, and there is a world after, and we live in the world after. But there is a detail that often escapes notice. In many versions of the flood myth, the hero who is saved receives a warning from a god. Noah receives instruction from God. Ziusudra is warned by the god Enki. Manu is saved by a miraculous fish that turns out to be a manifestation of Vishnu. Someone knew about the coming catastrophe. Someone warned the chosen ones. Someone ensured that knowledge would survive. This aligns with our hypothesis. The first civilization knew about the approaching catastrophe. Perhaps they had calculated the orbit of the comet. Perhaps they watched the sky with instruments we have yet to find. And they made a decision. Some of them stayed to warn humanity, to preserve knowledge, to bury Göbekli Tepe and build the pyramids as a message for future generations. Some of them left. They departed from Earth, set off for the stars, from where perhaps they had once come, and humanity remained behind to recover from catastrophe, slowly to rebuild what had been lost, to pass on stories of gods who came, taught, and departed. In virtually all cultures, the gods do not simply leave, they promise to return. Sometimes this promise is tied to the end of an age, to a new era, to a great renewal. The Mayan calendar is based on cycles. Great cycles succeed one another. Each cycle ends with a transformation, not necessarily destruction, but change, a transition to a new level. The Indian concept of yugas, the great world ages, describes a similar cyclicality. The Satya Yuga, the age of truth, then the Treta Yuga, the Dvapara Yuga, and finally the Kali Yuga, the age of darkness in which we now live. After Kali Yuga, the cycle begins anew. What if these cycles are not merely philosophical concepts? What if they are based on real astronomical periods, on real recurring events, on real catastrophes and rebirths? 12,000 years is approximately half of the precessional cycle, the slow oscillation of Earth's axis that causes the positions of stars in the sky to gradually shift. A full precessional cycle takes approximately 26,000 years. The ancients knew of this phenomenon. They encoded it in their myths and structures. If catastrophes are linked to the precessional cycle, if Earth periodically passes through dangerous regions of space, then the first civilization could have known this. They could have calculated when the next dangerous time would arrive, and they could have decided not to wait. But where could they have gone? This question seems like an insurmountable obstacle to our hypothesis. The nearest star system is 4 light-years away. Even at the speed of light, the journey would take years. However, our understanding of physics is incomplete. We know this. Dark matter, dark energy, quantum entanglement. There are phenomena we observe but cannot explain. Perhaps the first civilization knew things we do not. Perhaps there are ways of moving through space that we have yet to discover. Or perhaps they didn't need to go far at all. Perhaps they simply left the surface, underground, beneath the ocean, into places we have yet to explore. More than 90% of the ocean floor remains unmapped. We do not know what lies in the deepest cave systems of the planet. Some myths speak of subterranean worlds, Agartha in Tibetan tradition, Shambhala, underground cities inhabited by enlightened beings. Perhaps these are not merely legends, but regardless of where they went, the central question remains: what if everything we know about the origins of humanity is only half the story? What if the first civilization on Earth didn't perish from catastrophe, wasn't destroyed by war or disease, but simply chose to leave, voluntarily abandon this planet, leaving behind only stone puzzles and the whisper of ancient myths? We have walked through stones and time. We have seen structures that challenge our understanding of ancient technology. We have examined geological evidence of a catastrophe that reshaped the face of our planet. We have listened to the voices of the ancients, and we have found that all of them are telling the same story. A story of those who came from the stars, of those who taught us everything, and of those who one day left, leaving us alone on this small blue planet. Mathematics does not lie. Geology does not lie. And if the past is the key to the future, then we would do well to listen very carefully to what the stones and the stars are trying to tell us. Allow yourself for a moment to picture them, those who were here before us. Standing beneath the night sky, watching the approach of the inevitable, making their decision, to stay and perish, or to leave and survive. What choice would we make in their place? And the most pressing question of all, if catastrophes are cyclical, if Earth is periodically struck by forces from the cosmos, then when will our turn come? And will we be ready? The stones remember. The stars remember. The only question is, do we?